Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CFO Summit. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, KEYNOTE, Divvy, and Workday. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which includes complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. Also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would also like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we truly appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we would love to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Hina Agrawal, Global CFO of Wrangler and Supply Chain at Contour Brands. We're excited to have Hina with us for her opening keynote titled Resilient CFOs and the Unknown. Welcome, Hina, and over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the kind words and introduction, and thanks to the organizers of the Argyle Forum for this opportunity to share and discuss leading topics in finance. I'm Hina Agrawal, and I'll be sharing my thoughts on how to stay resilient and navigate unforeseen disruptions. I will share a framework of how to respond to changing external situations with a couple of examples to bring it to life. This uncertainty can even become a catalyst to drive change and progress. Before I jump into the topic, let me share my journey through change. Many of you likely have experienced just as many changes that have brought growth, development, and opportunities for you and your organizations. When I started my MBA, it was great. The market was booming and at its peak. But by the time I graduated, the tech bubble had burst and we were in a recession. I started with P&G Finance as part of one of their smallest new hire class. While at P&G, there were several large-scale changes, the acquisition of Gillette being one of them, recession of 2008, change in P&L ownership structure, globalization of business units, etc. After 10 years at P&G, I moved to Walgreens. And before I joined, they had lost one of their biggest customers, Express Scripts. Over the next 8 years at Walgreens, we went through supply chain transformation, acquisition of Boots Alliance, acquisition of 2,000 Rite Aid stores. I joined Underwriters Laboratories in October 2019. And 5 months later, COVID happened, followed by remote work, school from home that everyone here has experienced. I have now been at Contour Brands as CFO of Wrangler and Global Supply Chain for 18 months. First, starting remote from Chicago, then moving to North Carolina 8 months ago. In this short time, there has been remote work, hybrid work, supply chain disruptions, inflation, Ukraine war, and now macro uncertainty. As I reflect back, the pace of change has been increasing, with more change driven by external factors over the past years. Which brings us to the topic at hand. Uncertainty can be created by both internal and external events. Internal uncertainty can be driven by not only obvious events like organizational restructuring, mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, but also by inertia and silos and resistance to adapt to changing conditions. The external environment is rapidly changing as we experience macroeconomic cycles, geopolitical upheavals, changing government policies and regulations, industry shakeups, climate crisis, health-driven crisis, and the frequency and magnitude of impact of these events has been accelerating over the past 5 years, as all of you have been experiencing it yourself in your personal lives and as you work in different companies. So before we go further, let's look at what all of us are experiencing or hearing within our own companies and industries. Let's take a few seconds to complete this polling question if you haven't already. And thanks to the organizers for facilitating the polling question and all of you for your participation. Okay, so it looks like 42% of you are assigning a high probability of recession and 37% medium, and only 1/5 are saying there's a low probability of recession in the next 6 to 12 months. So let's get to it. There is a lot of uncertainty, but what are the things that we can do to keep our organizations focused and guide them? How can we as CFOs help our organizations through these times of uncertainty? I want to walk through a framework that I have used, which starts with the external situation that is changing and assesses how that may impact your own organization and what actions would help mitigate and manage the risk created by this new situation. The first example is of the latest bank crisis, the rising interest rates and tightening credit as a result of these factors. This has a direct impact internally on your suppliers, customers, and safety of your cash investments. If suppliers are at risk, this can impact the supply of your goods, product availability. It can result in lost business or customer penalties for delays, and most importantly, consumer disappointment. So what can we do to mitigate this risk? It is important to qualify backup suppliers, closely monitor existing suppliers' financial and operational health, and adjust investment in inventory and safety stock for top core products. This situation can also increase risk for customers or retailers you sell to, increasing the risk on receivables, risk of default, bankruptcies, and bad debts. To manage this risk, we monitor customer financial health, adjust credit limits, sometimes move to cash in advance, enforce timely collections with consequences for late payments in the form of penalties, and sometimes you have to stop shipment of goods if you think you're not going to get paid for them. The next area of risk this can bring about is safety of your cash. You can reduce or cap your risk by holding no more than a certain amount in any single financial institution. The second example is the unpredictability of sales created by the uncertain macro environment. This has direct implications on the level of inventory and marketing investments the organization has appetite for. Inventory investment has an impact on cash availability and margins. Too much inventory can result in creation of excess, obsolescence, storage costs, price and margin reduction. At the same time, too little inventory can result in low product availability, consumer disappointment, and lost sales. To manage to the appropriate inventory levels, many retailers institute an open-to-buy framework and prioritize investments in core, stable, long-life products and deprioritize highly variable opportunities that are chase opportunities, high cost, and variable. Another way to manage inventory risk is to negotiate flexibility in purchase contracts to respond to changing demand signals. If you have your own manufacturing, you can flex production. The challenge there is absorbing fixed costs during idle time. The second implication of an unpredictable sales environment is marketing investment. How do you balance the short-term ROI and long-term brand health spend? To be agile, some actions that we've been taking are stage gating investments, knowing what are your trigger dates to add or reduce spend in marketing, and being ready with a clear prioritization of both to cut and not to cut investments. Next, let's look at a framework for forecasting and decision-making. These are not restricted to times of uncertainty, but they are even more critical in times of uncertainty. So starting with regular monitoring of leading indicators that are relevant to your business. These can be macro indicators that have a high degree of correlation to your industry. In the apparel industry, for macro indicators, we look at inflation, consumer confidence, gas prices, disposable income, savings rate, discretionary spending, to name a few. Industry-specific metrics are things like cotton prices, copper prices, casualization trends, denim trends, return to office percentages. And then company-specific metrics can be things like POS consumption data, market share data, the retail inventory positions of our goods. Once we have a good understanding of what the environment looks like, we then move to looking at ranges of outcomes based on best case, worst case, most likely, especially when talking to multifunctional partners to get a full range of pros and cons to support each scenario and look for biases. Triangulating the outcomes with data-based analysis of historical patterns. And we go back through a long range of history, especially since the last few years have been somewhat choppy and not normal, I would say, when you look at 2020 or 2021. So a lot of us have been going back to look at 2019, 2018. What does a normal seasonal year look like to find those historical patterns? Looking at current business trends, how is the business trending? Are there any changes in trends that are happening? Are those just temporary blips, or are those indicative of a new trend in the business? What is the customer outlook? What is the outlook our customers are experiencing and predicting? How is the consumer behaving? What are the insights we can get from consumer behavior? Their response to promotions. Is it really driving more volume? Is it not? All these can further increase confidence in the quality of the scenarios. As we are developing scenarios, it's helpful to understand and focus on what are the material drivers and what is the impact. Once you quantify those, do those have a big material impact? Are they as variable, or are they more less dynamic, some others? And zero in on what are the key decisions that impact those drivers. In terms of decision-making and actions, in times of uncertainty, there are some baseline actions that are almost a given around cost controls and cash preservation. Next is going into projects that may be on the bubble and putting them on pause and reevaluating. Not necessarily if they should be done, but when is the right time to do them. At the same time, it is critical to continue investments for the long-term health of the brand and the business, and investments in strategic growth areas. So this is kind of the framework we look at for forecasting and decision-making, managing internal uncertainty created by inertia around how things have always been done, relying on tribal knowledge, anecdotal evidence, lack of access to coherent and cohesive data, and multiple sources of truth. External events, even though sometimes painful and can create uncertainty, they can also spur change and act as a catalyst for things like simplifying and optimizing processes, centralizing data to provide a single source of truth, and generate insights from analytics and data to enable decision-making. And automation can play a great role in this process. One of the recent examples we had in our organization was around cost control, where all the cost data for each department was made accessible through Power BI, creating a very easy to use interface and transparency, reducing friction versus looking at Excel spreadsheets to understand and access their information. This has led to rapid identification of areas of waste and opportunity, ideas to save without impacting the business, and full ownership and accountability. This has also freed up time for finance teams to focus on value-added activities around pricing and margin insights, creating customer P&Ls and profitability views. Next, we'll talk about communication do's and don'ts. This is especially critical in times of uncertainty. Bad news does not get better with age. And so being proactive, giving people time to think and absorb the news, and then come up with ideas and solutions is important. In times of change and uncertainty, it is easy to get swayed by sensational news in the media, which can create emotional responses and panic. Now, finance can play a big role here in staying calm, being balanced in the analysis of a situation where it's not overly negative, not overly positive, but looking at the whole glass, not just glass half full or half empty. We can also be objective because we have a lot of data at our disposal that can look at different parts of a situation and help the organization with data-based insights and focus the organization towards evaluating options and solutions. At the end of the day, the key message is that we need to be aware of what is happening externally. How does it impact your organization and your key stakeholders? Using modeling capabilities to understand the impacts, the key drivers, and then proactively communicating those and taking actions to manage risk. There are also things that do not change for the short and long-term health of the business. These are what we call control the controllables, keeping the organization focused on taking care of your consumer. At the end of the day, the consumer who has been loyal to you and has been buying your products for a long time, it's important that we do not lose sight and cut costs in areas that will impact the consumer. Product, I mean, your organization exists because of the product or service that you're offering. So continuing to innovate there and making quality goods and services available does not change. That stays the same. Taking care of your people, nurturing talent within the organization. Again, that's something that needs to happen regardless, because these are the people who are going to take care of your consumers, which then, takes care of the business overall. Investing in technology, this can be, like I said, a change and a catalyst to spur change, to accelerate some of the technology investments. In many cases, companies have made investments in technology and they just need to leverage a lot of that that may not be happening because of how people are used to doing things. Again, change can help spur that acceleration of technology adoption and automation, and help people get to a single version of truth that will ultimately yield benefits in cost improvement and cash generation that can help you weather storms and different economic cycles. So with that, I will open it up for questions and turn it over to Brittany to moderate the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hina, for such an insightful presentation. As a reminder, audience members can still enter questions, and we'll go ahead and review some that came through. This one question asks, are you able to speak to some of the biggest challenges that CFOs have faced since the beginning of the new year?
Yeah, I would say, the biggest challenges have been, there are two challenges coming into 23, which is around inventory levels that CFOs have been managing. As we went out of the COVID situation and opening up of economies, a lot of retailers were stuck with inventory that catered to COVID era goods and are now pivoting and to free up that cash to buy new inventory for the goods that consumers want now has been a challenge that people have come into 23 with. A lot of progress has been made by many different organizations. And as we've entered 23, we have now faced a lot of macroeconomic uncertainty driven by the rising interest rates and then the bank crisis that happened in March, which has led to tightening of credit. So all these things have made it a little bit more challenging to predict top line expectations for the rest of the year. And when you are when you're thinking about top line expectations, if that's uncertain, then shaping the rest of the investments in the P&L, whether it's inventory, marketing, headcount, that becomes more challenging. So this is where the scenario modeling to spur dialogue and decision making has really helped bring some structure to the uncertainty and ambiguity that's been created by the macro changes. Great question.
Great, thank you. This next question asks, do you think we will do away with the JIT idea?
With the just-in-time idea for, are you talking about inventory mainly?
I believe that's what they are asking about, yes.
I don't know if we will do away with the just-in-time idea. I mean, there are a few different angles to that question, right? So one piece of it is, how do you think about sourcing your product? So, as we went through COVID and then all the supply chain disruptions, a lot of companies have been looking at, should we be sourced closer to where our consumer is versus putting all our eggs in one basket in a far away, in more of a central area in one part of the world. So that's kind of one aspect of it. The other is, how do you manage your safety stock levels as you think about service? So the just-in-time, if it's done right, and the concept is basically that it's more of a pull investment versus push investment in inventory. In the long run, it should work well. I don't think that concept is obsolete, but I think we need to just rethink in terms of how it comes to life, in terms of how we set up a sourcing environment to create that backup as well as flexibility to go up, ratchet things up or down as needed.
Great, thank you. This next question, how do you expect retailers and manufacturers will adjust to the longer lead times?
Retailers and manufacturers have been adjusting actually to the longer lead times that have been created by supply chain disruptions. A lot of it, what I see is in our industry, the teams are planning well ahead of time. So things that would be done 6 months in advance are now happening 9 to 12 months in advance, where people are making commitments. And it is actually forcing a lot more discipline and thoughtfulness in not just how we do the process, but also when we start having those conversations and commitments to give everyone the right amount of time to react and deliver things on time.
Great. And in regard to like Chat GPT and automation of different finance functions, what resources do you think will be eliminated?
Whenever it comes to automation, it's always a curve on the lowest value add things that are repeatable with regular frequency. Those are the things that always fall in the automation bucket. Whether it's using visualization tools, whether it's new tools like Chat GPT, which have been a great help in, I would say Chat GPT is not only looking at reporting automation, looks at just the pure data. Chat GPT can also help read that data, which has been less of an automation in the past. And so it relies on reading that data and actually making sense of it, or creating reports, or creating speeches automatically. So a lot of those writing functions will also, will be prone to more automation with AI tools like Chat GPT, versus in the past, it was more of the data crunching and transactional work that was prone to automation. So this is getting to the next level of value add functions of not just automating the reporting, but also how to read and analyze the report.
Great, thank you, Hina. This next question asks, do you feel that supply chain disruptions will ever normalize? And if so, at what time frame do you feel it may resume normal operations?
I definitely think we are actually in the process of normalization of supply chains, where lead times are coming down. We've seen and the macro uncertainty has also reduced. While the macro uncertainty has gone up, the demand patterns are normalizing versus the swings that we saw during COVID and post-COVID. So yes, of course, I firmly believe that they will normalize versus what we've seen in the past year or so.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have time for a couple more questions. How are CFOs focusing on talent retention despite hard economic times?
Like I said, the last slide shows control the controllables, and people is one of those nurturing talent. A lot of people in times of uncertainty, you can really test and see how many people will rise to the occasion. And it's really important that we recognize these people. And there is no dearth of work, focusing the organization on work that is value added and that also grows and develops, giving people new experiences. And all of these uncertainties actually create a lot of opportunities for growth and development. When I look back on my career, the times when I've grown and developed the most has been in times where there has been uncertainty driven by either internal events like acquisitions or external events where there is uncertainty and ambiguity, and you can really shine. So I think giving people those opportunities to showcase their talents, and then continuing things like team building activities. Tomorrow my team and we are going for a packing backpacks for school kids who do not have the resources. It's going to take a couple hours of our day, but it's a great way to build that team activity and sense of community. And then continuing to have learning sessions. The learning session that everyone is participating in today, we also have learning sessions within the company to share across departments. I think keeping that learning, growing, team building, recognition can help with talent retention despite the external environment.
Excellent, thank you. And it looks like we have time to squeeze in one last question. Are you able to share how you are preparing for an impending recession?
Yeah, so this is really what I talked about in my presentation. We are doing a lot of we don't know for sure if there is a recession or not. So what we're doing is doing a lot of scenario modeling and looking at drivers and historical trends and patterns, and looking at what are the key drivers that we need to manage from an inventory investment, marketing investment, that will help us make sure that our P&L is robust, our balance sheet is robust, and that we can capture any opportunities that come throughout the year, and also manage if there is downside in the coming months from both a top line standpoint, cost and cash standpoint.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Hina. That is all the time we have for questions, but thank you again for such an excellent keynote. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Hina.
Great. Thank you, everyone.